This 10-year-old's genius just signed his death warrant. The moment Ethan Stark solved the impossible equation, he became a target. Not a hero, not a prodigy. Target. Campus security was already being called. Lies were being crafted. The same machinery that had destroyed his brilliant mother 15 years ago was awakening to hunt her child. Before we continue, I'd like to subscribe to this channel to help us reach out to thousands of people who need to hear these stories of justice and triumph. Hit that subscribe button now. 10 minutes ago, Ethan had been invisible. Just a quiet boy watching boring lectures while his mother recovered from surgery. But then he'd made the fatal mistake of being brilliant in front of the wrong people. He'd solved the Fibonacci paradox. 26 minutes. Elegant. Perfect. Devastating. Because this wasn't just any math problem. This was the weapon that Princeton's elite had used to destroy Dr. Sarah Stark, branding her a fraud when she wouldn't let them steal her research. And now her 10-year-old son had just proven she'd been right all along. Security needs to remove this child immediately. Dr. Victor Dumbledore's voice sliced through the stunned silence like a blade finding flesh. He's clearly been manipulated by an unstable mother. The trap was closing. The same lies, the same destruction machine, the same systematic brutality that had exiled a brilliant woman was now targeting her innocent child. Ethan's chalk-dusted fingers trembled as he realized the horrible truth. In this room, genius wasn't a gift. It was a crime punishable by obliteration. Every equation he'd written was evidence against the men who'd stolen his mother's work. Every elegant proof was a death sentence. Every moment of brilliance was another nail in his coffin. The footsteps in the hallway grew louder. The whispers turned vicious. 43 of the world's smartest people sat frozen as they watched a child's greatest moment become his worst nightmare. Because sometimes, when you're born brilliant into a world run by thieves, your greatest strength becomes the very weapon they use to destroy you. Ethan had learned early that his mind worked differently, and that being different meant being dangerous. While other children saw numbers as homework, he saw them as living stories that whispered secrets if you listened with your heart instead of your head. But he'd also learned that exceptional children were often broken by the weight of adult expectations, and he'd watched his mother carry scars that numbers couldn't heal. Dr. Sarah Stark had been 22 when Princeton destroyed her. Brilliant, fearless, and naive enough to believe that truth mattered more than politics. She'd spent 3 years developing her approach to the Fibonacci paradox, working 18-hour days, sacrificing sleep and friendships and her health for the pursuit of mathematical perfection. When she'd presented her preliminary findings, the academic world had called her work promising but incomplete. When she'd refused to hand over her research notes to senior professors who wanted to claim credit, they'd called her uncooperative. When she'd persisted anyway, they'd called her a fraud. Professor James Potter remembered those dark months 15 years ago, watching his brightest colleague crumble under accusations she couldn't defend, seeing her banned from publishing, witnessing her exile from the academic world she devoted her life to. Sarah had vanished from Princeton overnight, taking her broken dreams and her unfinished research with her. She'd resurfaced 5 years later as a high school teacher, married to a kind man who'd never asked about the shadows in her eyes. Ethan had been born into those shadows. His mother had loved him fiercely, protectively, but she'd also trained him to hide his gifts. Brilliant minds attract hungry people, she'd whispered during their secret evening math sessions. Never let them know how much you can see. Dr. Hermione Everdeen stood at the front of the lecture hall, her reputation built on being unshakable, her 15-year career dedicated to proving the Fibonacci paradox unsolvable. She'd published countless papers, spoken at international conferences, built her entire legacy on the foundation that some problems were meant to remain mysteries. And now this child, this beautiful, impossible child, had just shattered everything she'd believed about mathematics and about herself. But there was something in Ethan's dark eyes that troubled her more than the solution itself, a depth that spoke of secrets carried too young, a weight that no 10-year-old should know how to bear. What Hermione couldn't have guessed was that Ethan had solved more than a mathematical problem. He'd just proven his mother's stolen research was correct all along. And in a room full of people who'd participated in Sarah Stark's destruction, that truth was about to become deadly. The applause, when it finally came, felt like the breaking of glass, sharp, dangerous, wrong. Ethan heard whispers cutting through the sound like knives, saw faces turning toward the back of the lecture hall, where footsteps approached with the measured precision of a predator. Dr. Victor Dumbledore emerged from the shadows like a man stepping out of a 15-year-old nightmare. Professor James Potter's blood turned to ice water as he watched Princeton's Dean of Advanced Mathematics move down the aisle. Dumbledore had avoided symposiums for years, claiming academic politics bored him. His presence here meant someone had already made a phone call, and Ethan Stark had just walked into a trap that had been waiting 15 years to spring. "Extraordinary work, young man," Dr. Dumbledore said, his voice carrying the cold authority that had shaped Princeton's mathematics department for 3 decades. His silver eyes never left Ethan's face as he approached the blackboard, and the boy instinctively stepped backward, his small body recognizing danger even if his mind hadn't caught up yet. "Though I must ask," Dumbledore continued, his fingers trailing over the equations with something that looked like hunger, "where exactly did you learn to approach infinite sequence theory with such familiar methodology?" The temperature in the room plummeted. Dr. Everdene's face went white as understanding crashed over her. Professor Potter shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor like a scream. "I read my mother's old papers," Ethan said quietly, his voice smaller now, uncertainty creeping in as he watched the adults around him transform into something frightening. "The ones in her study. She taught me that every problem tells a story, and stories always have patterns." Dr. Dumbledore stopped walking. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Your mother," he repeated slowly, tasting each word like wine, "is Dr. Sarah Stark." It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence. Ethan felt the world tilt beneath his feet as he watched the stranger's face change from impressed to coldly satisfied. Around the room, whispers grew louder, more urgent. Someone's coffee cup hit the floor and shattered. "James," Dumbledore said without looking away from Ethan, "you didn't think to mention that you'd brought the disgraced Dr. Stark's son to my symposium? That you'd let him access the very research that led to his mother's expulsion from serious academia?" The word hit Ethan like a physical blow. Expulsion. His mother, his brilliant, gentle mother who taught teenagers to love mathematics, who solved impossible problems during their secret evening sessions, had been thrown out of this place. Humiliated. Destroyed. "The resemblance is unmistakable," Dumbledore continued, circling Ethan now like a shark who'd smelled blood. "The same unorthodox approach. The same dangerous arrogance. Tell me, child, when you solved the Fibonacci paradox, did you simply copy work that your mother was forbidden from publishing?" "She solved it herself," Professor Potter interjected, but his voice cracked with fear. Dr. Dumbledore's laugh was winter-wined through bare branches. "Did she? Or did she simply complete plagiarized research? Research that rightfully belongs to Princeton University." The accusation hit the room like lightning. Ethan's brilliant mother hadn't just been disgraced. She'd been accused of stealing the very work that might have made her famous. And now Ethan had just proven that her research had been groundbreaking all along, which meant someone else had stolen credit for destroying her. The silence stretched like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could smell the fierce sweat of 43 brilliant minds who just realized they were witnessing something far more dangerous than mathematical genius. Dr. Dumbledore's eyes glittered with the cold satisfaction of a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey after 15 years of patient waiting. But then Dr. Hermione Everdeen stepped forward. "Victor," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "you're frightening the child." Something in her tone had shifted. Gone was the stunned academic, replaced by a woman who recognized injustice when it stared her in the face. "Whatever happened between you and Dr. Stark 15 years ago has nothing to do with this boy's achievement." Dumbledore's smile turned predatory. "Doesn't it? Hermione, surely even you can see the obvious explanation. This child has access to research that was deemed academically unsound and potentially fraudulent. His solution proves nothing except that Sarah Stark's work continues to contaminate young minds." Professor James Potter felt something crack open in his chest, a protective fury that had been building for 15 years. He'd watched Sarah Stark get destroyed by this man's machinations, had seen her brilliant light dim to a flicker, had spent countless sleepless nights wondering if he should have fought harder for her. The woman he'd been too afraid to love, too cowardly to defend when she needed him most. Sarah's work wasn't fraudulent, James said, his voice carrying across the lecture hall with surprising strength. You know that, Victor. We all know that. She was the most promising mathematician Princeton had seen in decades, and you destroyed her because she wouldn't let you steal credit for her discoveries. The room erupted into whispers. Several professors shifted uncomfortably. They remembered Sarah Stark, remembered the brilliant young woman who'd asked too many inconvenient questions about whose name appeared on which papers. Ethan's mind raced as pieces of a 15-year-old puzzle began clicking into place. His mother's late-night tears, her reluctance to talk about her college years, the way she sometimes stared at mathematical journals with the expression of someone looking at photographs of the dead. You took her research? Ethan said suddenly, the words tumbling out with the clarity of pure truth. When she wouldn't let you put your name on her papers, you accused her of stealing instead. His young voice carried the devastating simplicity of a child who hadn't yet learned that adults were supposed to be trusted. Dr. Dumbledore's face flushed dark red. How dare you? The approach signatures match, Dr. Everdeen interrupted, her analytical mind finally catching up to what her heart had already recognized. She moved to the blackboard, her finger tracing Ethan's equations with growing excitement. Victor, these theoretical frameworks, they're identical to the preliminary findings Sarah presented at the 2010 conference. The conference where you demanded she hand over her research notes for peer review. The lecture hall had gone deadly quiet. 43 brilliant minds were beginning to understand that they were witnessing more than academic drama. They were watching the exposure of a 15-year-old cover-up. James felt his phone buzz against his chest. Sarah. She was calling from the hospital, probably wondering how the simple babysitting favor was going. How could he tell her that her worst nightmare was about to become reality? How could he explain that their son, because that's how he thought of Ethan, had always thought of him, was about to face the same destruction that had shattered her? But there was something else. Something in Hermione's eyes as she studied Ethan's work, a growing wonder that looked almost like admiration? Hope? When was the last time James had felt hope about anything beyond keeping Sarah and Ethan safe from exactly this kind of exposure? The child needs to be removed from this environment immediately, Dumbledore said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Academic security should be contacted. These research materials need to be confiscated and properly investigated. Over my dead body, James said quietly, but his words carried the weight of absolute conviction. Ethan looked up at the man who'd been like a father to him for 5 years, saw something fierce and protective blazing in James's dark eyes, and felt a spark of hope. Maybe they weren't as alone as he'd thought. Maybe someone would finally fight for his mother the way she'd always fought for him. But what none of them realized was that Dr. Dumbledore had spent 15 years preparing for exactly this moment, and he had weapons none of them had imagined. The lecture hall's heavy oak doors burst open with a violence that made everyone jump. Dr. Sarah Stark stood in the doorway, her hospital gown still visible beneath a hastily thrown-on coat. Her face pale but blazing with a fury that made the air crackle with electricity. "Get away from my son," she said, her voice cutting through the academic posturing like a blade through silk. James felt his heart stop and restart. Sarah was supposed to be recovering from surgery, sedated and safe in her hospital bed. But here she was, magnificent in her protective rage, looking like an avenging angel despite the 4 bruises on her hand and the exhaustion shadowing her eyes. "Sarah," Dr. Dumbledore said smoothly, but Ethan caught the flash of panic that crossed the older man's face. "How unexpected. I trust your surgery went well. Cut the pleasantries, Victor." Sarah's eyes swept the room, taking in her son's frightened face, James's protective stance, the equations covering the blackboard. Her expression shifted from fury to something approaching devastation as she realized what had happened. He solved it, didn't he? The Fibonacci paradox. "Using stolen research," Dumbledore replied coldly. Research that rightfully belongs to you. Sarah laughed, but the sound was sharp enough to draw blood. Is that what you've been telling people for 15 years, Victor? That the work was yours? She stepped into the room with deliberate grace, her bare feet silent on the polished floor. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you a story about academic theft. 15 years ago, I developed a revolutionary approach to infinite sequence theory. Dr. Dumbledore here was my advisor and my lover. The room collectively inhaled. James felt something crack open in his chest, a jealousy so sharp and unexpected it took his breath away. When I refused to add his name to my research papers, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, he threatened to destroy my career. When I still refused, he accused me of plagiarizing work that didn't exist. When I demanded proof, he produced falsified documents claiming I'd stolen preliminary research from a Princeton database. Dr. Everdeen gasped. The Waterston Archive. Those documents were fabricated, Sarah finished. Every single one. Victor had help from colleagues who owed him favors, who believed his word over mine. I was 22 years old, alone, and facing down Princeton's entire mathematics establishment. Ethan stared at his mother, seeing her fully for the first time. Not just as the gentle woman who'd protected him, but as the brilliant mathematician who'd been destroyed for refusing to compromise her integrity. But here's the beautiful part, Sarah said, moving to stand beside her son. Ethan just proved my research was correct. My approach, my methodology, my solution. Which means for 15 years, Dr. Dumbledore has been sitting on revolutionary mathematics that could have advanced the field by decades. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a cannon blast. My lovelies, I can barely breathe after that revelation. The truth is finally coming to light, but I have a feeling the real battle is just beginning. If you're as invested in Sarah and Ethan's fight for justice as I am, please hit that subscribe button and join our ducal family. We're about to witness something extraordinary unfold, and I don't want you to miss a single moment of this incredible journey. Your support means everything as we follow this story to its stunning conclusion. You have no proof, Dumbledore said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Sarah smiled, and it was sharp as winter starlight. Don't I? James, would you mind calling Princeton's Board of Academic Integrity? I believe they'll be very interested in the original research notes I've kept hidden in my safety deposit box for 15 years. The room erupted into chaos as the truth hit like a tsunami. But Dr. Dumbledore's next move would reveal just how far some people will go to protect their secrets. Dr. Dumbledore's smile was arctic. Safety deposit box? How convenient. He pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness. Campus security, this is Dean Dumbledore. I need immediate assistance in Lecture Hall A. We have an unstable individual threatening a child's welfare. Sarah's face drained of color. Victor, you can't. The child is clearly traumatized. Dumbledore continued into the phone, his voice taking on concerned authority. His mother appears to be having a psychological episode. Yes, she's just been released from psychiatric treatment. I was in surgery, not... Sarah started, but Dumbledore's next words destroyed her. Academic records show previous mental health concerns. The mother has a documented history of delusional episodes regarding stolen research. His eyes locked with Sarah's. I'm afraid she's convinced her son to participate in her fantasies. The lies hit Sarah like physical blows. Around the room, she watched faces change from curious to pitying to suspicious. 15 years of careful reputation building crumbled in seconds. Mom! Ethan's voice was small, frightened. He'd never seen his mother look so broken. James stepped forward, but Dumbledore raised a hand. Professor Potter, I suggest you distance yourself. Your relationship with Dr. Stark could be seen as compromising to your position here. The threat was clear. James felt his career hanging by a thread, the same thread that had snapped for Sarah 15 years ago. He looked at her desperate face, at Ethan's confusion, and felt shame burn through him like acid. He'd failed to protect Sarah once before. Could he really watch it happen again? Dr. Everdeen stared at the blackboard, at Ethan's brilliant solution, then at the broken family before her. She'd built her career on mathematics, not politics. But mathematics didn't lie, and what she was witnessing was the systematic destruction of truth. "Security is en route," Dumbledore announced. "The child will be placed in protective custody until appropriate psychological evaluations can be conducted." Sarah's world shattered. They would take Ethan, question him, break him the way they'd broken her. Her son would become another casualty of Victor's need to protect his stolen legacy. "Please," she whispered, and the word tasted like defeat. "He's just a child." "A child you've clearly manipulated," Dumbledore replied coldly. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Campus security was coming. James's hands trembled as he calculated his options, all of them ending in professional suicide. Dr. Everdeen stood frozen between truth and self-preservation. Ethan looked around the room at the brilliant adults who were about to let injustice win again, and realized that sometimes a 10-year-old has to save the grown-ups from their own cowardice. "Stop!" Ethan's voice cut through the approaching footsteps like a bell through fog. He walked to Dr. Everdeen, his small hand touching her arm with surprising gentleness. "Dr. Everdeen, you've spent 15 years trying to solve this problem. How did it feel when you realized I'd found the answer?" Hermione's breath caught. "Extraordinary. Revolutionary. It was everything I'd hoped mathematics could be. And if someone tried to steal that feeling from you? If they claimed you were crazy for pursuing truth?" Ethan's young eyes held wisdom that made her ashamed of her silence. The security footsteps grew louder. Sarah closed her eyes, preparing for the end. Then Dr. Everdeen stepped forward. "Victor," she said clearly, "I'm withdrawing my support for any action against Dr. Stark or her son." Her voice gained strength. "As the mathematician who's studied the Fibonacci paradox longer than anyone else here, I can verify that Ethan's solution demonstrates understanding impossible to fake." Murmurs rippled through the room. Other professors began shifting, whispering. James felt something break free in his chest. 15 years of cowardice cracking apart. "I'm calling the board myself," he said, pulling out his phone. "Sarah, I should have done this years ago. I should have fought for you." Their eyes met across the room, and Sarah saw something blazing there she'd thought was dead forever. "The original research notes," James continued, his voice strong now. "I was there when you wrote them, Sarah. I can testify to their authenticity." Dr. Dumbledore's face went white. "James, think about what you're doing. Your career isn't worth a damn if I can't use it to protect the woman I love," James said simply. Sarah's heart stopped. Love. After 15 years of silence, fear, and carefully buried feelings. Ethan smiled, the first real smile since this nightmare began. Around the room, professors were standing, phones emerging, voices rising in defense of truth over politics. The security guards appeared in the doorway just as Princeton's most distinguished faculty began choosing sides. Dr. Dumbledore had one last desperate card to play, but he'd forgotten that sometimes the truth has teeth. "You want evidence?" Dr. Dumbledore snarled, his composed mask finally slipping. "I'll give you evidence." He strode to his briefcase, fingers flying over the combination lock. 15 years I've kept these, insurance, you might say. He pulled out a manila folder, papers spilling across the lectern. Original correspondence between Dr. Stark and her research partner at Cambridge. Love letters, actually, quite detailed about their collaborative work on sequence theory. Sarah's face went ashen. James felt his world tilt as Dumbledore held up photographs. Sarah in another man's arms, intimate moments captured through telephoto lenses. "She stole more than research," Dumbledore continued viciously. "She stole methodologies, stole credit, stole another mathematician's heart while pumping him for information. The Fibonacci approach? It belongs to Dr. Marcus Chun of Cambridge, her lover. Sarah Stark is nothing but a brilliant thief." The room fell silent. Even Sarah's defenders looked shaken. Then Ethan laughed. It was a clear, delighted sound that cut through the toxic atmosphere like sunshine through storm clouds. "Dr. Dumbledore, you made a mistake." The boy walked to the scattered papers, picking up one of the photographs with clinical interest. "You said his name was Marcus Chin?" "That's correct," Dumbledore replied. confused by the child's reaction. Ethan turned to face the room, his young voice carrying absolute authority. "My father's name is David Chun. This is my dad in these pictures." The revelation hit like lightning. Sarah's secret smile confirmed it. The man in the photographs wasn't her research partner. He was her husband, Ethan's father, who'd been working on completely different mathematical problems at Cambridge. "You've been so focused on destroying my mother," Ethan continued, "that you never bothered to verify basic facts. The correspondence dates show these were written 2 years after the Fibonacci research was complete. My parents were already married." Dr. Dumbledore's face crumpled as 15 years of careful lies disintegrated. James felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by devastating clarity. Sarah had never betrayed anyone. She'd simply fallen in love with someone else while Victor destroyed her career. "The real question," Dr. Everdeen said quietly, studying Dumbledore's panicked expression, "is how you obtained private photographs and personal correspondence. That suggests systematic harassment, Victor. Stalking." Campus security stepped into the room just as Princeton's dean of mathematics realized he'd finally confessed to crimes that would end far more than his career. 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Stark stood in the same lecture hall where her world had nearly ended, watching her son explain quantum mathematics to a room full of graduate students. But this time, the whispers were filled with admiration, not suspicion. Princeton had moved quickly once the truth emerged. Dr. Dumbledore's insurance files had revealed 15 years of harassment, document falsification, and systematic abuse of power. The Board of Academic Integrity hadn't just stripped him of tenure. They'd referred the case to federal prosecutors. The man who'd destroyed careers to protect his ego would spend the next decade in a very different kind of institution. Sarah's research had been officially recognized, published in 3 prestigious journals, and hailed as groundbreaking. The Fibonacci paradox was now known as the Stark solution, with a special notation crediting 10-year-old Ethan Stark as co-discoverer. "Still can't believe you're back," James said softly, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. He'd resigned from Princeton to join Sarah at MIT, where she'd been offered the department chair, a position that came with resources, respect, and the freedom to nurture young minds like Ethan's. "Still can't believe you chose us over tenure," Sarah replied, accepting the warmth of both the coffee and his presence. "Easiest decision I ever made." James's fingers brushed hers. "I wasted 15 years being afraid. I'm not wasting any more." Their wedding had been small, elegant, held in Sarah's mother's garden with Ethan as ring-bearer and Dr. Everdeen as maid of honor. Hermione had become Sarah's closest friend and fiercest advocate, using her reputation to help rebuild what Victor had tried to destroy. Ethan finished his presentation to enthusiastic applause. At 10, nearly 11 now, he was officially the youngest consulting mathematician in MIT's history. But more importantly, he was happy, protected, allowed to be brilliant without being exploited. "Mom, Dad," he called, bounding over with the irrepressible energy of a child who finally felt safe to be extraordinary. "Dr. Rodriguez wants to know if I'm interested in working on the Peterson conjecture next semester." Sarah and James exchanged glances. The Peterson conjecture had stumped mathematicians for 30 years. "What do you think?" Sarah asked her son. Ethan grinned. "I think every problem tells a story, and I love stories." As they walked out of the lecture hall together, a family forged by mathematics and strengthened by love, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years. Peace. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. Behind them, equations filled the blackboard like poetry, proving that sometimes the most beautiful solutions come from the most unexpected places. Truth had finally won. Tell me in the comments how this touched your heart. I love to hear your thoughts on these incredible journeys we take together. And if you haven't already, please join our Ducal family by subscribing. Until next time, remember that brilliance and courage can change the world, no matter how young or small you might feel.